Between 1965 and 1995, 1,435 companies appeared on the Fortune 500. After a 5-year study into which of them achieved sustained exceptional performance, researchers found that the list of companies that actually made the leap from good to great was remarkably short. There were just 11. One of those 11 was Circuit City. By the late 1990s, the Richmond-based retailer had become a household name, employing 60,000 people across hundreds of locations. This chart tracks their financial trajectory. In the 15 years following their transition, Circuit City stock outperformed the general market by 18.5 to 1. To put that in context, it generated higher returns than global heavyweights like Coca-Cola and General Electric. These 11 companies didn't just get lucky. They adopted a specific set of internal disciplines that allowed them to sustain a level of performance that their competitors were unable to replicate. But by 2009, that dominance had vanished. Circuit City filed for bankruptcy, liquidated its entire inventory, and permanently locked its doors. This creates a difficult question. If this company had the verified traits of a corporate giant, why did it fall apart so quickly? To understand Circuit City's death, we first have to look at the specific, often quiet leadership style that fueled its rise, a style that contradicts almost everything we're told about how a CEO should behave. Usually, when a company is in trouble, the board looks for a savior. We expect a charismatic, larger-than-life figure, a celebrity CEO like Lee Iacocca, who can command a room and capture the headlines. However, the research into these 11 companies showed a different pattern. None of the historic transformations were led by celebrity figureheads or ego-driven saviors. Researchers called this Level 5 leadership. At the top of the hierarchy, these executives aren't defined by their personality, but by a paradoxical blend of deep personal humility and an almost stoic professional will. This was the archetype of Alan Wurtzel at Circuit City and Darwin Smith at Kimberly-Clark. They were mild-mannered, often shy men who shunned the spotlight and focused entirely on the success of the firm rather than their own celebrity. In these cases, greatness wasn't achieved through a single heroic leader, but by an executive willing to set their ego aside for the long-term health of the organization. These leaders used a specific mental filter. When the company succeeded, they looked out the window to credit their team or good luck. When things went poorly, they looked in the mirror to take full responsibility. This habit of taking responsibility is at the heart of the Stockdale Paradox, named after Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was held as a prisoner of war for 8 years in the Hanoi Hilton. Stockdale survived by holding 2 conflicting ideas at once. He had unwavering faith that he would eventually get out, but he also had the discipline to confront the brutal facts of his current reality, no matter how grim. Alan Wurtzel applied this to Circuit City in the 1970s. Faced with near bankruptcy, he didn't hide from the numbers. He confronted the fact that their old model was failing and ruthlessly pivoted to the superstore format that would define the company for decades. He proved that in business, blind optimism is a danger. Survival requires a clear, honest assessment of the facts as they are, not as you wish them to be. By the 2000s, however, that culture began to change. Alan Wurtzel moved on, and a new management team arrived that lacked the humility that built the brand. They reversed Wurtzel's logic. When sales struggled, they looked out the window to blame the economy. When things went well, they looked in the mirror to credit their own management skills. This arrogance blinded them to a new brutal fact: Best Buy. Their rival had developed a superior model: lower prices, a better selection, and a staff that didn't work on commission. Circuit City's leadership ignored the threat. They believed they were smarter than the competition and refused to acknowledge that Best Buy's model was more aligned with what customers actually wanted. Instead of adapting, they tried to cut their way to profitability. In 2003, management fired 3,900 of their most experienced salespeople just to reduce the cost of commissions. They also spent nearly $1 billion on stock buybacks to keep shareholders happy. It was a short-term move that left them with zero cash reserves when the 2008 recession hit. Once the leadership lost the humility to face the facts, the company's collapse became a matter of time. In November 2008, the company ran out of options. Circuit City filed for bankruptcy, and when no buyer could be found, the court ordered a total liquidation. The human cost was high. 34,000 people lost their jobs, and many employees lost their life savings as their company stock became worthless. On March 8, 2009, the lights went out for the last time. The Circuit City story shows that corporate greatness isn't a permanent achievement. It's a fragile state that requires constant, rigorous discipline to maintain. It also highlights a specific risk in leadership. The ambition that takes an executive to the top of a company can easily turn into the hubris that prevents them from seeing the very facts they need to survive. To build something that lasts, you have to nurture the traits Wurtzel once used. You have to be humble enough to credit others, willful enough to demand excellence, and honest enough to face the brutal truth of your reality.